Chapter 28, The Witch and the Warrior. The fires of the great dragon had scarcely finished their slow collapse into ash when the influence of the north began, once again, to make itself felt, not as an open threat, but as a force on the borders of the kingdom. It was subtle at first, slow, like a shift in atmospheric pressure, perceptible only to those already inclined to unease. Merlin and Morgana were both disturbed, but also everyone, recovering from Uther's horror and the dragon's visitation, a kind of collective sensitivity and jumpiness. With Uther Pendragon reduced to an erratic presence, visible, authoritative in silhouette, yet internally disordered, the practical weight of governance had passed, almost unnoticed, to Arthur. It was a transfer less ceremonial than organic, and it had the full weight of the knights behind it. They had pledged as much in the field before the castle, and now every action was one which supported Arthur in his role, once again, as regent. The sun lingered too long that evening, swollen and discolored, as though the sky itself were reluctant to conclude the season. Fires of the old festival of Beltane began, and Arthur did not have the will, nor Arthur the heart, to stop the people of Camelot marking the old way in a manner that brought comfort and continuity. Bone would be burned of cattle slaughtered for the winter store, and the remnants of field scraps and waste, clearing the way for the hibernation that the land would undertake during that winter and the renewal in the spring. Who was he to tell the people to forget the old ways as long as they acknowledged the new? In the lower town, the market square had ceased to function as a space and had instead become a system of trade currents as the northern traders circulated and the season's buying and selling began with aplomb. Pelts were traded with salted pork and beef iron hewn from the Hayfrons' rich red rocks exchanged with seal and whale meat. An air of disconnect from their king abounded, and the people turned up with urgency to land the best deal they could for their family. The distrust brought about by Uther at the harvest festival coloring all that the ordinary folk did and how they behaved. The knights supported the city guards in the lower town now, as the bumper trade season took effect. They were to keep the peace, and remind the northerners that the ways of Camelot were more peaceable and civilized. Sir Gawain, predictably, became the center of the heightened activity. There was always, around him, a slight distortion in the social field. Attention bending, laughter clustering, interactions accelerating, like a high gravitational field affecting the behavior of light. He leaned against a trestle as if it had been placed there for his convenience, turning an apple over in his hand with idle precision. His attention, however, was not idle. "Aled," he said, watching her with a focus that dispensed with pretense and calling her by her warrior name, "you look as though you're evaluating the exits of this place." She did not immediately answer. Her gaze, which had been on him for most of the day, had moved past him, following the measured, repetitive pacing of the king's guard near the lower dungeons. "It's too quiet," she said at last. Gawain glanced around, faintly amused. The square was anything but quiet. "No," she added, more softly, "not that kind. The other kind. The sort that comes before a storm." Gawain looked at Elune evaluatively, refusing his mind to think of her face or body. "You've been spending too much time in the woods with Merlin, practicing a broken bar. Whatever you practice out there." He stepped closer, his hand brushing her arm, not quite casually, not quite deliberately. It was a gesture that served multiple purposes, none of them entirely conscious. To an observer, they presented a familiar configuration, wit meeting wit, proximity justified by banter. But there were variables beneath the surface, small hesitations, fractional adjustments, that suggested that what they had begun at the summer festival was yet to be concluded. 88,888,888. 100 yards away, Arthur stood in discussion with Sir Leon, engaged in what was, on the surface, a negotiation concerning wolf skins that were being offered by the Pictish traders. However, his eye was on Gawain and Elune, registering the contact of Gawain's hand, Ilune's brief, reluctant smile. It was a fait accompli then, as the Lyonessians would say. For a moment, Arthur considered crossing the distance and interrupting them with a trifle. "Instead," he said, "the price is acceptable, Leon," and waved a hand towards the Pictish trader, ending the conversation. His mind opened to Gwen, and her goodness and beauty, and Arthur lingered on the face of the girl as he oversaw a deal concerning Haefreneel from Caerglau and seal pelts from the far north of the island of Britain. 88,888,888. The arrival of Morgause redefined the court. Her arrival was deliberate, premeditated, her focus locking onto Morgana as she issued the challenge to Arthur. For the true duel was for the soul of the king's ward. In the arena the following morning, Morgause fought with a fluid, knowing grace. She didn't merely strike at Arthur's shield, she struck at his certainty. "You should have me fight," Elund had told Arthur, taking him aside. "Do you doubt my strength?" "Doubt?" He was about to pout his hand out to her, then gripped his sword. "I have no doubt in you, but it is I who has been challenged, Aled, and I cannot back down." "She challenges my father, and he cannot fight. We are Cymric. We send our most suited." He held up a hand, sensing Elund was about to argue. "I must go." And so, in the great hall, Elund stood with the knights, watching the black-clad figure circle the heir to the throne of Camelot. Arthur stood, tall, proud, with his kingdom behind him, arms outstretched as if to draw his realm to him. Opposite, the Black Knight, Morgause, raised her blade. "You defend a man without knowing what he took," she hissed as their blades locked. "Or who he destroyed to build this." She flicked her gaze toward Morgana, and the world shifted. Arthur's response time lengthened by a fraction, enough for Morgause to sweep him to the dirt. "Yield," she commanded, "and learn." And she told them all of Arthur's parentage, and that of Morgana. It was as if a wind had come into the hall and swept away the air from it, leaving everyone panting and choking. Elund caught Merlin's eye for a moment. Perhaps they could help a broken bar, perhaps with her might and his magic a broken bar. Arthur knelt. Not from injury did the concession come, but the catastrophic interruption of his own reality. Above them, Arthur's silence confirmed the truths that he could no longer conceal from the world. "It is because of Morgana," Merlin told Elund, long afterwards. Not to challenge Arthur. She wanted her to know her origin, the darkness, and had to find a way to entertain it in Camelot. If anyone wanted revenge for the deaths of the villagers whom Arthur had condemned 4 months before, no one could have doubted the pain the king was suffering with the revelation of the truth before the whole court. His face was hollow, skin nearly white as blood flowed away from his extremities. If he was in a position to fight the intruder, he would have stood and charged at Morgause himself. As it was, he could only sit in his throne as his world crumbled around him. 88,888,888. It was raining. It always seemed to be raining, though Elund ought to expect it as it was nearly Advent. It slipped over roof tiles and made stone steps treacherous. It seemed to represent the sadness of the entire city. And she was to stand in it for her night watch, though little could be seen in the dampness. On the lower ramparts, Gawain was stationed, beginning his anti-clockwise route around the walls. She approached him and they walked together, a hand away. "We swore to protect Arthur, swore to stand beside him," Elund said at last as the rain had turned to an annoying drizzle. "His face today a broken bar. How many bastards find out in such a way?" Gawain agreed. "Arthur did not do a good enough job of concealing the truth." "Arthur is still heir, though." "Is he?" Elund asked, her voice lower, her tone urgent. "Morgana is older than Arthur. She is Arthur's eldest child. We forget, since the Christians came, that the king and council can name any successor, and she has as much claim to the throne as Arthur now." "As in Ireland, for once, Aled." Gawain stopped walking, and pulled her to him. "Stop. Let's just look at what's in front of us." He pulled her closer with a gesture that was unexpected, and she gasped as he put his lips to hers. They shared a bond. They were both rebels, used to living on the road and fighting for coin for any lord that wanted an arm. They had both, too, decided to pledge their loyalty to Arthur. Was what the knights had done in the field below the castle now changed? Elund wondered whether, a broken bar, and now there was no time for wandering, no time for thoughts. Gawain pulled her under the stone parapet, into a section sheltered from the elements as he kissed her deeper, his meaning clear. All was in flux, nothing certain now. The heat of his body against hers in the chill damp, and the terrifying velocity of her own heart led them away from the wind-swept ramparts. In the quiet, shadowed safety of his quarters, the heavy layers of armor and duty were finally shed. There was a slow, rhythmic unraveling, a discovery of scars and skin, of whispered names and the silent promise that, for this one night, the storm outside could not reach them. In the deepening shadows, as the candles flickered and perished, Elund and Gwaine found a different kind of peace, a private kingdom of their own making. 88,888,888. Dampness had given way to fog in the early morning, and a cold light was shining through the east windows. Arthur had not slept. Morgause had left, but had cast off the cloak of truth, leaving behind a broken paradigm. His mother was not who he thought she was and, further, Morgana was his half-sister. In the shadows behind him, Merlin watched Arthur as he moved through the citadel, his usual arrogant confidence in tatters. More than once Merlin's boot caught a stone or a rock which made Arthur turn, but the prince stood glass-still when he saw Elund in the company of Gwaine. Merlin saw what Arthur saw, two people standing together in a quiet, shared moment, one of a shared intimacy which had not been there before. An energy that Arthur did not know that he had filled his chest, a dull ache as he watched the knight who was yet to be a knight push her hair away from her face. He saw the way Elund looked at the rogue herself, with a vulnerable trust rather than the defiance she saved for Arthur. He scraped his scabbard deliberately against the flagstones and looked between them, the arrogant confidence returning once more. With disappointment, Arthur saw the two of them move apart, but neither quickly enough or further enough for his liking. "Attend to Morgana," Arthur said to Elund, his voice level despite the weight in his chest. "She has need of a friend this day." He walked away, toward the duties of the crown and the distant, steady light of Gwen, leaving the warrior and the rogue in his wake.